One task remaining on this socket power unit chassis is to install a new power cord. I've cut off the length of this reproduction power cord. Inside it's modern plastic coated wire, and then it's covered with a cloth jacket. On the end of that I've got a few choices here. There's a modern reproduction of a vintage power plug, and I've got a couple real vintage ones. This one's pretty grungy, so I think I'll go with this guy. I'm not sure what the original Brunswick power plug might have looked like, but this is certainly from the right era, so I'll just simply remove the remains of the old power cord and wire this one in. The other ends of it, one goes right to the power transformer, and the other would feed in through the power switch and then into this lead, which goes into this 110, 120 mode switch. I'm going to be installing a fuse in line. I'll do that on this switch side. So this one will go straight to one side of the AC plug. Other side of the AC plug will go to the power switch and then come back around, go to a fuse, and then hook into this wire. Okay, so here's the plug I want to use, and here's the cord. Now these old style plugs have a pretty big hole in the end. You can put the cable right inside, and that's how it seems they did it back then, but then it really flops around here, and I don't like all that stress and strain up there. So that got me thinking, well, I could put some kind of strain relief in there. And in the past I've wrapped it with heat shrink tubing in several layers, different sizes. But it doesn't look that good, it's not that flexible. So when hunting around, and I found I had some of these AC cord strain reliefs handy. These are the type that would normally go through a hole in a chassis. They got one end that has some slots on it, and you would feed in your line cord through one end and then shove it through the cabinet, and it would pinch right here in the sheet metal, and then you'd have a nice flexible feed. Well, it got me thinking, maybe I can use it with this plug, and what do you know? It actually fits in there fairly well. Which leaves me with one challenge, which is to get this cloth covered wire in through that piece of rubber there. And if it was just the inner wire, it'd be no problem. But when you got this cloth covering, what happens? It immediately bunches up and doesn't want to go in. Well, after a little experimenting, I discovered that you simply take a little bit of masking tape, in this case blue painter's tape, and wrap it around the end and kind of taper it off. You can use that to thread it right through, like so. And now I can do that and then strip the ends and wire it in, and I got myself a nice power cord. Here's the finished power plug. I then fed the other end through the chassis, tied a knot for strain relief, and although I wanted to keep everything 100% original, I do recognize the need for a little safety, and I needed a tie point to hook in what was remaining of the old power leads to something, so I put a little terminal strip in here. So the power cord comes in here, one end goes right here, which feeds into one side of the transformer. The other side of the power cord goes, I believe, to this point, which then goes to the power switch. The other end of the power switch comes back in here. There's a fuse inside this black tube, and then finally we go to the other side of the transformer. Well, actually not quite. It goes to the 110, 120 switch down here, then to the power transformer. Alright, now assuming I didn't make any mistakes, this should still work, so I'm going to flip this back over, hook it up to the other side of the chassis, and do one final test before I put this back in the cabinet. It's a good sign. Alright, I guess I got all my wiring right.
The word "you" are idiot.
Yeah, I just misspelled your.
I guess that's the all-time favorite.
That's what gave him in the nose repeatedly. Spirit, with whom you live and reign, one God, forever and ever.
Rival benefit of less than 5%.
Someone had asked me what kind of tubes would have originally come with this radio. Well, they definitely would have all been globe-type tubes like these. I went through my stash and pulled out as many as I could find. So we've got a Globe 71, Globe 27, my only two Globe Type 26s, and a Globe 80 that's gone a bit gassy, so it's glowing a little bit blue there on the plates. It may look cool, but they're not supposed to be doing that. So I don't know how much longer that tube's going to last. I had been trying to find a couple more Globe 26s on eBay, and I just gave up. The prices are just getting ridiculous. Somebody was selling a matched set of 4 RCA branded Globe 26s, which is exactly what this radio would have used, and I think they sold for a little over $200. Well, I can't invest that kind of money into this set. So the two I've got in there, I think one of them is new old stock and one is used and a bit weak, but hey, radio plays alright. Now something else I found out is there's one adjustment you can make on this radio, and I think I might have mistakenly called it an RF compensator in an earlier segment. Well, what it really is a feedback control. Controls how much signal is fed back from the plate of this first stage, or second stage rather, to the grid. That has the effect of boosting the gain, but too much gain, too much feedback, and it starts oscillating. So, for example, right now I've got it tuned to a fairly weak station, and if I tighten this down, which increases the capacitance, I can boost the gain. But too much, like right there, and I lose it. Back that off a little bit, now it's back. But if I optimize it for a weak station, now when I go to a strong station, it's going to be way too loud. Well, in fact, it's already oscillating too much. Can't even receive a signal. So you really have to kind of do a compromise. Cut back on the gain such that you can receive strong stations without overloading the radio, but still provide some gain so you can pull in weaker stations.
Cooler 70s at the lakefront.
So that's something I write about here. So this is probably the strongest local station.
Mostly sunny, cooler, high 75.
WGN. And now I'm back at that weaker station. I had to crank up the volume, but it's still going to be pretty good. Alright, and that last thing, that little curly cue that I'd clipped out, one of the theories online, which I think has some merit, is that what it was there for was to fine-tune these stages. See, there are no tuning capacitors on these stages, so I think it was there as like a trimmer cap. So if you recall, when I had tested these capacitors, there was some pretty wide variation there, 200, 170, and so on. Well, I've replaced them all, so they're now all exactly 160. So I think that's why it works fine without that compensating capacitor being in the circuit. Now, yes, I realized it was clipped out before I had even replaced those caps, but maybe that was just somebody fooling around and trying to get the set working better. I don't know, but all I can say for absolutely sure is that the radio plays fine with it being taken out of the circuit right now. So what I'm planning on doing is, once I get my Hickok 600A tube tester all squared away and calibrated, I'm going to go through and use my best tubes I have for this set, whether they're ST style or Globe style. Maybe someday I'll get a nice set of Globe 26s and I'll populate the whole set with them. But for now, I've got a feeling I'm going to be going with a few of these 26s. Well, I have to go with at least two because I have no choice. Now as for the cabinet, it's been weeks since I did the initial refinishing pass, so the lacquer's nice and hard. Yesterday I gave this top panel a light sanding with 400 grit and sprayed on a couple more coats of clear lacquer. Quite smooth now. I'll let that set up for a few more weeks and I'll do a final rub out on that. And now I'm moving on to the rest of the cabinet. Just did some light sanding up here. Gonna do light sanding on the rest of the cabinet, give it a couple more coats and then the same deal. But I do want to wrap up this series, so I'm going to reassemble the radio temporarily once this lacquer sets up for about 24 hours, so we can take a final look at it, and then at some point in the future I'll finish rubbing out the whole cabinet.